I'm sure that some of you have seen the story from Bloomberg and from Zero Hedge the last few days, talking about having the charter not having much value in terms of providing returns. This is the headline from Bloomberg. CFA study, first of all, in an email exchange with the author directly. It was not a CFA study, all right? But anyway, CFA study casts doubt on whether passing test is key to fund manager success. And the other title read, New study finds CFA charter holders are actually worse at investing. Both those headlines are wrong. And this is a result of, you read one line in a study and you conclude that, well, there we go. We've got the answer without reading all the other lines or actually reading the paper itself. If you have access to a library, a university library, all of them have database access. You should be able to get the paper. It's an International Review of Financial Analysis. It's called Manager Characteristics, Predicting Fund Performance. And I've read it, I've gone through it, and I'm going to show you the methodology and some of the tables. And then we'll see whether or not those headlines are nothing more than clickbait, or if there's something there. So, if you've been through level 2, quant, multiple regression, everything that we go through, you should fully understand. You should be able to look at these tables and understand each and every variable and what the t-statistics mean, what the directions of the coefficients mean. And if you are familiar with the Carhart four-factor model, well, then you'll know which model. You'll recognize the model being used in this paper as well. So let's look at the data set that was being used. We'll look at the regressions and the coefficients that were being tested, and then we'll look at the results. And then we'll be in a better position to judge for ourselves whether or not those headlines were written by authors that really had no interest in really finding out whether or not those headlines were true, but were more interested in monitoring their stats as they saw how many clicks their story got. Okay, let's look at the data set that they used. It was from Morningstar. They looked at fund returns, monthly fund returns from January 1990 to July 2015. And they created one-time series for each unique manager. So they ended up with 6,291 manager career returns. What this means is they could have been at this fund for this period of time, then they jumped to this fund, then they were over at this fund. Well, they would then move all of these up and create one long time series for a manager. They have 6,291 of these. And of course, the returns per manager by fund significantly higher, and there is some regression that looks at that as well, but 6,291 unique managers in here. And here are all of the variables, all of the independent variables that went into these regressions down here. Not the first one, but this regression, there were 3 regressions in total. The first one is just your four-factor model. Gender is 1 if the manager is male, 0 otherwise. This is important. We always should understand how the variables are operationalized so that when we're looking at the results and we're looking at the coefficient, we know how to read it, whether it be knowing that the variable behind it is a 1 or a 0. CFA, 1 of the manager is a CFA charter holder, 0 otherwise. Whether the individual has a doctorate, 1 if the manager holds a doctorate degree. I think that's the bigger story here. I think a lot of PhDs should be, somewhat concerned about the results there. They are not good if you're a PhD. If you're a PhD, it's clearly saying you should not be in this business at all. I take offense to that. MBA, 1 if the manager has an MBA, 0 otherwise. This is the SAT score. This is a score ranging from 826 to 1535. Business undergrad, 1 of the managers completed a business-related undergrad program, 0 otherwise. Quant is 1 if the manager completed a quantitative degree, whether it be in math, computer science, engineering. And a manager can have a 1 in business undergrad and a 1 in quant as well, although I don't see any results that that separate that out. So it's just, it could be that any individual has a 1 on both. They're not mutually exclusive. Tenure, the tenure, experience, and age is important to look at because they do find that there's multicollinearity there. So they run regressions. One with all 3, and then they run the regression again with just the tenure, just the experience, and just age to see if any of the coefficients up here change. Tenure is the length of time in months that a manager has managed a given fund. Experience is the length of time in months since a manager first appears as a manager in the sample. And age is the length of time in years since the manager's year of graduation. I think that's a nice way to operationalize it as opposed to say, well, 32 versus 28. What if they're both 4 years out of university, right? So I think that's a nice way to measure it. Owner, 1 if the manager has a personal investment in the fund, 0 otherwise. And team size, weighted average number of managers of a fund, weighted by length of time the managers or team members. So these are the independent variables. What are our dependent variables? Alpha, each of the betas that we get up here, it's each of these betas, and then a measure of idiosyncratic risk. So a individual's time series, 6,291 times, is regressed against alpha to see which of these predictors are significant in predicting alpha. Then it's run against each of these beta coefficients, the exposure to the market variable, exposure to size, exposure to value, exposure to momentum, to see which of these are significant in predicting, are you more likely to be a value manager or growth manager, more likely to follow momentum or not, and then of course the level of idiosyncratic risk that you're exposed to. So the first regression is manager performance against manager characteristics, manager performance being alpha. The next is manager style and risk taking, all of the beta coefficients, against manager characteristics. And the last regression is manager idiosyncratic risk, this little guy down here, against manager characteristics. Let's see what happened. Okay, let's look at table 2 first. Descriptive statistics. This is something we covered in level 1 quant. When you have a data set, to get a nice high-level overview of what you're dealing with, you run some descriptive statistics, ranges, minimum, maximum, average, standard deviation, things like that. 89.1% of the population, or of our sample, sorry, not population, let's be correct, of our sample were male. 44.5% of the sample had a charter. I'm going to come back to this number later on, so remember that. Only 3.9% had a PhD, 40.2% with an MBA. Average score on the SAT, 1325, range from 826 to 1535. Business undergraduate, 74 or 75% with a business undergraduate. 17% had either a math, engineering, or computer science undergrad degree. And then you have your tenure, 62, 80.9, and 46. This is age since graduation. This is the amount of time you've actually been a fund manager, and this is how long you've been a fund manager in a particular role. And let's go to table 3. Let's look at some results. Here we're looking at manager performance and characteristics. This is managers for funds. Remember, we said that they took a manager at a particular fund and then followed that manager around and then just appended all of the returns to get 6,291 time series. This is not doing this. This is just saying, looking at each of these tenures separately, you get 16,207 manager funds sample. So it's a fairly large sample. Let's just get to what we're interested in. And I've highlighted where CFA is here. All of them are positive, meaning that it does contribute to alpha, but the t-statistic, all of the t-statistics are not significant. But let's compare that with MBA over here, and I'll block this off so that we can see a little bit better. And to be clear, 1, 2, 3, 4, these are 4 different regressions. The first regression uses all 3 of these variables, tenure, experience, age, but there is a high degree of correlation between them. So the run again, regression 2 through 4, but only using one of the variables in turn for each one. So if we look at, with all three of them in, 0.281 versus 0.305, fairly close. T-statistic, not significant. Number 2 is 0.212 versus 0.33, so it's higher for the MBA. Using experience, 0.268, 0.277, pretty much equal. Using age, 0.25 versus 0.15, higher for the CFA. So we have higher, about the same, and lower. So, you know, when you cancel them out, it appears to be equivalent with CFA. PhD, all negative. All negative and significant. It seems that you do not want to hire a PhD. Look at business undergraduate. Same thing, all negative, but not significant. If you want to be significant, you got to be a PhD. Isn't that what that's saying? If you want to be significant in life, you got to be a PhD. Negatively significant, but still, at least you're significant. You can say something. Here, you have to say, I'm insignificant. I have a theory about this, by the way, and I'll explain my theory when we get to the end of why those things are negative. And I think this is a problem with the way finance is taught. And I think that the CFA curriculum suffers from this as well. And at the end, I'll talk about that and what I think would be a good solution for that, or what I'd like to see the content begin to do. Look at quant. About half of what CFA is here, all the way through, it's lower than the coefficient for having the CFA charter, and less significant. Well, less. I mean, if you're insignificant, you're insignificant. Neither one are significant. Owner, also very low and not significant. Team size is significant. That's not significant. Significant here, significant here, significant here. There might be something with tenure that's less predictive of either experience or age. It might be capturing something else altogether, or not something else altogether, but something slightly different than what experience and age. It seems these two seem to be catching the same thing. But small and negative. The larger the team size, the worse that you do. Anybody who's worked on a committee knows you don't get anything done. That oftentimes there is no such thing as entrepreneurship by committee. The more independent you are, the faster you can move, and the more you can work on your ideas and your intuition and your experience without being double checked by somebody saying, I disagree. So there we go. Do you see anything here that would lead you to conclude that, oh my God, you don't want to hire those charter holders? You'd rather have a charter holder than a PhD. I think you can say that, although with only 3.9% representation, I don't know. It seems that if you had a charter holder or an MBA, I'm indifferent. They all seem to, they're pretty much in line with each other as far as the coefficients go, even though they're not significant. If we were looking at, more significant in an absolute value sense as opposed to a cutoff sense, the charter holder is more significant, has a higher valued T statistic in that sense, and business undergrad, not so great on that one. Let's look at some of the other results. All right, this is table 4, manager performance and characteristics. This is manager career. So now we're dealing with just the individual. On the last one, if an individual was at one fund for a period of time, then switched to another fund, then switched to another fund, that was 3 observations. Here, these will be brought up like this, and this will just be one series, and now that's 1 observation. So you're following one manager around from fund to fund over time. Let's look at CFA. All greater than 0, all significant. Significant. And it's the same thing. 2, 3, and 4 are just versions of 1 with just only one of these 3 variables in instead of all 3 at the same time. All greater than 0, all significant. Look at MBA, all greater than 0. None are significant. Doesn't seem like the headline is telling much of a true story so far, right? Look at PhD, all less than 0, but again, none are significant. Business undergraduate, all less than 0, but none are significant. Still, the sign is less than 0. The direction on the coefficient is sort of troubling. SAT, none of these are significant either. Quant, all greater than 0, but none of these are significant either. So if we're looking for which variable was the most significant in this entire regression for these managers, you have it right here. Right there, all greater than 0, all significant. Even when you look at gender, none of these are significant, and they have negative coefficients, meaning that females tended to do better. But again, 89.1% were male. We don't have enough. I don't know if there's enough difference between the two to make any conclusion, and they're not significant to begin with. But experiences, and no matter how you measure experience, it is significant all the way down. Again, that should not be surprising that those people with more experience will do better in any job. Give me any job, and somebody with more years of experience will probably be more efficient and do a better job than people with lower efficient or lower experience. Let's talk about PhD in business undergrad. Why are we getting negative numbers? And on the last one, we had negative numbers as well. And I think it has to do with how finance is taught. It's taught in a very mathematical paradigm, modern portfolio theory. And in modern portfolio theory, we look at what's called an efficient frontier, the Markowitz efficient frontier. And we are told again and again and again and again that we can get to the efficient frontier. However, we cannot achieve returns above the efficient frontier for the same level of risk. The best we can do is the efficient frontier. And these are less diversified portfolios below the efficient frontier, so that as we begin to combine them, we take an asset, we start adding other assets, we can lower risk to a point, then risk starts to raise, but return begins to increase. And we can't do any better than the diversified portfolio, so we'll take some amount of cash. There we go. This is the efficient portfolio, so if we want this level of return, we know that we're going to leverage this portfolio to get to that level of return. It is ingrained in you that you can't exceed the efficient frontier. Even CFA is guilty of this. You learn this right at level 1 portfolio management, modern portfolio theory. Here's the Markowitz efficient frontier. Live with it, right? And, we hear again and again that study after study shows that active managers fail to outperform their benchmark. So if you're told this for a long enough period of time, you may not even try. So it could be that these are not even trying because they're saying, well, I'm going to work within the paradigm. You tell me that if I do this, this is what's going to happen. I've been taught this. This is what I'm going to do. But if you take someone who's never heard of the efficient frontier, doesn't know anything about modern portfolio theory, they don't know that they can't do it. They don't know that they can get a higher level of return for the same level of risk. They don't know that. So if they don't know it, they're going to do it. Think of the analogy of, and I'll try to draw one out as best I can here. The elephant in a zoo, not in a zoo, but in a circus. What do they do when that elephant is a little baby? They tie a big chain around its leg to a stake in the ground. And that elephant, let's make him really angry. That elephant is going to tug and tug and tug on that chain to try to get away, and it's not going to be able to until it stops tugging. Then what they do is they replace that chain with just a little rope. Just a little rope tied to the thing, and the elephant just stays there, and you think, but that elephant could tear that rope out of the ground in no time. Yeah, but in his mind, and the elephant has a pretty small brain up there. I know a guy that's like that. Anyways, he's got a pretty small brain. He doesn't know that anymore. He doesn't know that he can do it, so he doesn't even try. Well, you can think of these PhDs as elephants when it comes to the market with a brain that size, when it comes to the efficient frontier and efficient markets is that they've been told so many times in textbooks and in the literature that it can't be done, they no longer try. So I think that's what's going on with the PhDs and the business undergrads, is they've been taught in a particular paradigm that says you can't do it, don't even bother. Well, there we go for table 4. We're not done. We got a couple more tables to go through. I am going to get to the one that I think that they jumped all over. But so far, what do you think? You know, you get to this part of the paper, you're looking at table 4, you're going, I don't know what those stories were about. You know, here's the story. Beat up on the PhDs. Beat up on them. Many of them deserve it. Not me, though. Table 5. Here are each of the factors, the market risk factors. There's market risk, size factor, value factor, momentum, and idiosyncratic risk. And again, a regression was done on the beta loading for the market factor against all of the factors, except now they've dropped out the other two. They're saying, look, why run a whole bunch of regressions? Let's just take experience. It seems to be the one that's there. And of course, you have all the other variables as well. In case you're wondering about the size of these coefficients, they're scaled by a factor of 10 to the 3 just for presentation. Otherwise, you'd end up with a whole bunch of, small ones like this. Now, when we say scale for a factor of 3, let's just take a PhD. It'd be 0.01737 negative, and then if you take a MBA, it'd be negative 0.29033. 0.02933. So if you're 0.017 or 0.029 versus 0.029, right? It's not as dramatic. So this is just scaled, but keep in mind that, even though that it's scaled, it's still not that dramatic. But we're going to look at significance here. Overall, let's look at the charter holders and let's classify them based on the 4-factor model. They have lower market exposure. Not significant, but if you went to the 10% level, yeah, that is significant, but not significant at the 5% level. Not really, lower market exposure, but large cap, not significant. Value, again, not significant, but if we were going to classify it, lower market exposure, large cap value plus momentum. Momentum is significant at 1.99. Being that the sample is so large, your t-stat would approach the z-value of 1.96 at 95%, 1.99. And less idiosyncratic risk. Here we are here. Notice the negative coefficient. Again, not significant though, but less idiosyncratic risk than the PhDs, those with high scoring SATs, and the business undergrads. I think for PhDs and business undergrads, that they have less idiosyncratic risk is not surprising. If you believe that you can't exceed the efficient frontier, you are going to build very diversified portfolios that have very low levels of idiosyncratic risk. And across the top here, what I did, market factor, in red is lower, blue is higher. So PhDs and business undergrads have higher exposure to the market risk factor. So they tend to hug the index. Whereas you have deviations from the index, CFA, MBA, higher SAT, which you can think of as a proxy for just, although it's an imperfect proxy, a proxy for intelligence. And if you have money invested, surprise, surprise, a little bit negative. There's another surprise for this a little bit later on as we get down through the column here. Team size is higher exposure to the market risk factor. Again, you tend to hug the index more. Can't go wrong if you hug the index, right? No one ever got fired by hugging the index. And experience, you tend to move away from the market factor a little bit more and get other risk factor exposures. The second one, small cap versus large cap. We could see a large cap leaning here. Large cap, large cap, large cap, large cap, large cap. Even with experience, large cap. Team size pushes you to small cap, and same with a PhD. If we look under owner, if you have your own money, all less than zero. All of them are less than zero, but look at the T-stats. They're all significant. So you end up with less exposure on these. So you lean more towards large cap. you lean away from growth a little bit, and you're leaning away from momentum and lower idiosyncratic risk. It appears that they are, when you have your own money at risk, you take less risk when their own money is at stake than when they're using other people's money. I find this counter to the way I think. I would take significantly more risk with my own money than I would feel comfortable giving to someone else. But I guess it's where you sit in your risk aversion coefficient. I'm not very risk averse. I'm risk aware, but I'm not risk averse. So, maybe it has something to do that people who put their own money in were originally more risk averse to begin with. I don't know. It's one of those, could we look into that a little bit more? Not much on this one here. It was just breaking it down based on the type of profile that they seem to have, and I don't know that there's anything too interesting on this one. Okay, I'm going to skip table 6. Table 6 is a big long table about persistence, broken down by decile. I'll just explain to you what this table is doing, and then we'll look at the results. So what it's doing is it's looking at the top decile performers and then looking at what the return is in the following month to see if there's persistence. If there's persistence, we should have positive numbers. If there's no persistence, it would be negative. And we see for the most part, and it's only in this little area here that we're looking for both of them, only up here that we're looking. Because these are differences and these are differences in each side. So we're only looking at the middle amounts. They're all positive except for down here, the ones with less experience. So let's look at gender and experience first, just so that we can get our feet wet in how to interpret this, and then we'll move over to, I'm sure, what everyone's interested in. Here, 0.166 versus 0.115. It's 51 basis points, 0.051 for male outperformance over female outperformance in terms of persistence. Significant T-stat, insignificant T-stat, but when you look at the difference between the two, it is insignificant. So even though persistence for males is significant and persistence for females is insignificant, the difference between them is insignificant. This is for long-term experience. If you have a shorter level of experience or less experienced, your T-stats are not significant in either one. The difference is almost non-existent and not significant either. And the difference between males and females here in terms of long versus short, in other words, this is regardless of experience for both. A significant T-stat, not a significant T-stat, but as we've already seen, the difference between them, whether it be long or short, there is no significant difference between them. Let's move over to CFA versus non-CFA, 0.152 versus 0.188. It seems a little bit stronger. Significant T statistics on both. You can see from their p-value where they happen to be. So this is sort of suggesting the non-charter holders have a higher persistence, not higher persistence, but in terms of persistence, a higher follow-on month. But when you look at the difference between them, sure, this is significant and this is significant, but is the difference between them significant? No, it isn't. It is an insignificant difference between them. And when you look at short-term experience, not significant here, not significant here, different directions on the coefficients. Look at the difference between them, still not significant either. When you look at charter holders in terms of long or short, significant. Non-charter holders, long or short, not significant. And I think this is what they picked up on. Just this one little thing. And here is some narration from the paper. Let's pay attention to what is being written here. The other curious finding relates to the role of the CFA designation. Earlier results do not, I'll underline that, support a significant positive role for the CFA designation among the cross-section of managers, while In terms of manager persistence from Table 6, the top decile of non-CFA managers go on to outperform the top decile of CFA managers 1 month ahead. And I think that's where they stopped saying, aha, there's a story. Let's write that. Let's go on. However, from Table 7, that's why we just skip over Table 6. From Table 7, Panel B, we see that among both long experienced managers and separately among short experienced managers, there is no significant difference between CFA and non-CFA manager in 1 month ahead performance. However, among CFA managers and non-CFA managers separately, long experienced managers go on to significantly outperform short experienced managers in both cases. Is that surprising to you? A group with more experience went on to outperform those with less experience. There is no significant difference between CFA and non-CFA managers in 1 month ahead performance. Again, the results in Panel B suggest that it is experience rather than the CFA designation that plays an important role in the previous persistence findings. So when you read this and you say, let me run and write out a story, I'll put it on the internet and I will get clicks. And if I get paid for clicks, all I got to do is put a really exciting title in there so those with a charter would click on it and say, what? And those without a charter would click on it and say, see, I told ya. And they didn't read the rest of it, right? Don't let other people tell you what to think. Always go to the source. Always look at it and be critical. And on the next screen, we're going to be critical of this particular study. Okay, I told you earlier to pay attention to this number. 44.5% of this sample were charter holders out of some 6,291 unique manager careers. 44.5% were charter holders. Does something strike you as interesting about that number? I want you to think of all the charter holders over all the years that have been produced versus all the people that would like a job as a fund manager. And divide the number of CFAs in existence, all of them in existence, by the population of financial market participants, all of those people who want a job as a fund manager. That's going to be less than 44.5% because there really aren't that many of these. That is massively overrepresented. Massively overrepresented. In fact, there are more people in that sample with a charter than there are with MBAs. 40.2% had MBAs. 44.5% have a charter. What does that tell you about access to jobs? 44.5% of them have a charter. Some other questions that weren't answered that, when you get to the end, you'd like to know the answer just to tease out some of the data a little bit better. What was the average age of CFA versus non-CFA when they first began their experience? Remember, experience is the number of months since they've graduated from whatever undergrad they graduated from. Well, could it be that charter holders were hired faster and began their experience at a shorter period out of university than non-charter holders? I don't know. Whenever we as PhDs read papers, we read them to see what the state of the research is, what the findings were, but you're always reading them as well to see where the holes are. Where can I extend this study? Where can I add a contribution? What was left unanswered? Which is why almost every single academic paper ends with a call for more research. We need more research, because you can't just say, you know what, that's it, we're done, let's go home. No. It's got to be more research. Well, that's an interesting question here. The bigger and more interesting question is right here. Do CFA charter holders manage funds with more constraints? Remember, if you're trying to get active return, that's risk. If you're trying to get active return, remember, it is a function of a number of things: your information coefficient, square root of bread, also your transfer coefficient. This is how free you are to implement your ideas. Could it be that the funds with very tight constraints are hard to manage, and because they're hard to manage, you need more qualified, technically qualified people to do it? And if that's the case, you're picking out the charter holders, perhaps. I don't know. Again, it's just one of those research questions. You got to put a question mark and say, I'd like to know the answer to that. Could it be? And when I say could it be, I'm not saying it is. I'm hypothesizing, and then you test whether or not that's true or not. Could it be that they had portfolios with more constraints? Much harder to generate alpha the tighter and tighter your constraints are. Remember now, since this is a function of TC, it's all multiplied. The lower TC, imagine TC was 0. Well, this whole thing would be 0. You'd have a passive fund. Transfer coefficient of 0 is don't do a damn thing. So it could be that. Do charter holders manage larger funds? And if they do, that may explain the large cap value tilt that we saw in one of the exhibits. And if they manage funds with more assets under management, perhaps the sponsors of that particular fund, in their due diligence say, well, we really should, lean towards, these more credentialed people. Could be. We don't know, because there was no assets under management variable in all of the variables that they had. Nothing was controlling for the assets under management or the constraints or the transfer coefficient that the particular fund manager was under. So you can't compare, this person over here with, and we'll just use some examples, who is unconstrained in what they can do with this manager over here. And let's say that this is a $500 million fund and this is a $10 billion fund with huge constraints on maximum positions, deviations from benchmark holdings, the minimum number, the maximum number, maximum size in any industry, maximum this, minimum that, like how much cash do you have to hold, all of these things, the conditions would matter. So they did try to control for it a bit by looking at manager, fund, even if it's the same person, manager with this fund, manager with this fund, manager with this fund. These are 3 different funds that the manager was at, perhaps, versus one manager over a period of time. But I would have liked to have seen an assets under management variable to determine whether or not it was related to that. Because if you have a large cap, if you're running a large cap value fund, it's going to be a lot harder, especially in big efficient markets like large cap stocks, to generate alpha. I don't know. Listen, no research paper will ever answer all the questions. This is not a criticism. What I'm doing here is not a criticism of the author in the least. Not in the least. This is just a natural thing you do at the end of a paper, is you look and you say, well, what questions would I have liked to have seen the answers to? And what would I think those answers would be? That's how you start. You start with some hypotheses. You start with an idea. Then you say, okay, well, to test those hypotheses, what type of data would I need? Let's start with the author's data set, and then let's just add some variables. Can we figure out the average age of the individual when they were first hired as a fund manager? Was it sooner? Was there a significant difference between when they first appeared in terms of their experience? Did they manage funds with more constraints? Did they manage funds with larger assets under management? The fact that they are massively overrepresented means they are in demand in the marketplace. They must be in demand for a reason, right? Anyways, what do you think about those 2 headlines now? Let me see if I can put those headlines back up on the screen. I don't know if I still have them here, but we'll try to find them. This is the most egregious one right here, I think. Here it is, which didn't seem to spend a lot of time doing anything. New study finds CFA charter holders are actually worse at investing. Did you, in all of the tables we went through, did you walk away with that going, oh my God, they're terrible? It would have been better to say, new study finds PhDs are actually worse at investing. And on that one, I would have said, well, you kind of got us there. Yeah, I'll agree. Most PhDs are so steeped in modern portfolio theory, they don't know that they can outperform the benchmark. They just don't know it. Luckily, I went into academics having first done a tour duty in the real world, so I knew that you could. I didn't really buy into that. Let's look at that Bloomberg one again and ask ourselves, do we like that headline, or is this just some writers? Look at the name of the writer, by the way, right? Doesn't even want to use his real name, Tyler Durden. You know who that is? Come on. What's the first rule of Tyler Durden? You don't talk about Tyler Durden, right? Come on. CFA study casts doubt on whether passing test is key to fund manager success. Did you walk away with that it's casting doubt on anything? I didn't walk away with that. Anyways, there we are.